A martial arts expert hit a royal guard. What happened next was insane emotional stories, best. Every morning before sunrise, he practiced alone in a small open field near his home. His movements were calm, controlled, and precise. For him, martial arts was not about fighting or showing power. It was about discipline, balance, and respect. His teacher had always told him that true strength was knowing when not to strike. He earned his living by teaching self-defense to a small group of students. They respected him deeply, not because he was strict, but because he was fair and kind. He never raised his voice, never acted with anger, and never allowed pride to control him. When students asked about his past, he smiled and changed the topic. He believed that skills should speak through actions, not stories. One day, news spread that a grand royal ceremony was going to take place in the capital city. It was a rare event. People from nearby towns were allowed to attend and watch the procession. The martial arts expert decided to travel there, not out of excitement but curiosity. He had spent most of his life away from power and authority. He wanted to see the city, observe the people, and then return quietly. When he arrived, the city felt different from his peaceful hometown. Tall buildings, wide roads, and heavy security surrounded the area. Royal guards stood everywhere in polished uniforms, holding their weapons with pride. Their eyes scanned the crowd sharply, and their posture showed authority. Ordinary people moved carefully, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. The martial artist blended into the crowd. He wore plain clothes and kept his head low. He did not want attention. He noticed how tense everyone looked. Children held their parents' hands tightly. Older people whispered instead of speaking openly. The guards shouted instructions, and people followed without question. As time passed, the crowd grew larger. The sun was high and people stood for hours. Some guards were calm, but others seemed impatient. The martial arts expert quietly observed everything. He noticed how power changed behavior. Some guards treated people with respect, while others used their authority harshly. Near him stood a young man who looked nervous. The young man stepped slightly forward to get a better view. It was not intentional, just a small movement caused by the pushing crowd. Suddenly, a royal guard noticed him and reacted aggressively. The guard grabbed the young man and shouted at him loudly. The young man tried to explain, but fear made his words unclear. The martial arts expert felt uneasy. He believed rules were necessary, but so was humanity. He watched as the guard pushed the young man back roughly. People around them stayed silent, afraid to interfere. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to be noticed. The expert took a slow breath. He reminded himself of his teacher's words, "Never act out of anger." He stepped forward calmly and spoke in a respectful tone. He did not shout. He did not challenge authority. He simply asked the guard to be gentle and reminded him that it was crowded. The guard turned sharply, surprised that someone had spoken. His eyes were filled with pride and irritation. He warned the martial artist to stay back and mind his own business. The expert nodded and took a step back, showing no resistance. He had done what he could with words. For a moment it seemed like the situation was over. The crowd relaxed slightly, but then the guard, still angry, shoved the young man again, harder this time. The young man stumbled and almost fell. His face showed pain and humiliation. Something changed inside the martial arts expert. Not anger, but responsibility. He had promised himself long ago that he would never allow power to be used to harm the helpless when he could prevent it. He did not want to fight. He did not want to embarrass anyone. But he also could not turn away. He stepped forward once more, positioning himself between the guard and the young man. His posture was calm, his hands open, his voice steady. He asked the guard to stop and warned that someone could get hurt. The guard felt challenged. In front of the crowd, he could not tolerate this. He raised his hand to push the martial artist aside. In that instant, training took over. The expert did not attack. He simply moved with precision, redirecting the force and delivering a single controlled strike meant to stop, not injure. The guard fell to the ground. The world seemed to freeze. The crowd went silent. No one breathed. No one spoke. People could not believe what they had just seen. A royal guard had been struck. Something no one dared to imagine had happened. The martial arts expert stood still. His face showed no pride, no fear, no satisfaction. He immediately stepped back and lowered his hands. He knew what this moment meant. He knew the consequences would be serious. Within seconds, other guards rushed toward him. Weapons were raised. Voices shouted orders. The expert did not resist. He allowed himself to be surrounded and restrained. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply stood calmly, accepting responsibility for his actions. As he was taken away, people watched in shock. Some felt fear. Some felt admiration. Others felt confusion. The young man who had been pushed earlier stared at him with wide eyes, unable to speak. The ceremony continued, but the mood had changed. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, not just a clash of strength, but a clash between power and principle. The martial arts expert was escorted away through narrow streets, away from the crowd and into the unknown. He did not know what awaited him. Punishment was certain, but as he walked, his mind was calm. He remembered his teacher's voice again. If you must act, act with honor. And deep inside, he knew that even though the path ahead would be difficult, he had stayed true to who he was. The real consequences were only beginning. The martial arts expert was taken through narrow streets, away from the noise of the ceremony. The guards moved quickly, their footsteps heavy on the stone ground. People stopped and stared as he passed, but no one spoke. Some faces showed fear, others showed surprise, and a few showed quiet respect. He kept his eyes forward and his body relaxed. He knew panic would only make things worse. They brought him to a secure building near the royal grounds. The doors were large and cold to the touch. Inside, the air felt heavy. The guards removed his outer clothing carefully and searched him, but they found nothing except a simple cloth band tied around his wrist, something he wore as a reminder of discipline. They looked confused. He did not look like a troublemaker. He did not speak unless spoken to. He was placed in a small room with plain walls and a single wooden bench. The door closed behind him with a deep sound that echoed in the space. Time passed slowly. He did not know how long he had been sitting there. He focused on his breathing, keeping his thoughts steady. His teacher had trained him not only in movement but in patience. Outside the room, the situation was tense. The guard who had been struck was being examined. His pride was hurt more than his body. He was angry and embarrassed. Other guards talked among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. Some claimed the martial artist had attacked without reason. Others admitted they had seen the guard act harshly first. Word of the incident reached higher officials quickly. A report was prepared and witnesses were listed. The matter could not be ignored. An ordinary citizen striking a royal guard was serious. The officials wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. The martial arts expert was finally escorted into a larger room. Several officials sat behind a long table. Their faces were serious, their voices controlled. They asked him to explain himself. He bowed slightly out of respect before speaking. He did not deny what he had done. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He explained how the crowd was tense, how the young man had been treated roughly, and how he had tried to calm the situation with words before anything else. He made it clear that he had not acted out of anger or disrespect. He said he only acted to prevent harm and that he used the minimum force necessary. His voice remained calm, even as the officials questioned him closely. They expected fear or excuses, but he offered neither. Witnesses were then brought in. The young man who had been pushed stood nervously before the officials. His hands shook as he spoke, but his words were honest. He explained how the guard had grabbed him and shoved him more than once. Other people from the crowd confirmed his story. Some guards, though hesitant, also admitted that their fellow guard had lost his temper. The room grew quiet as the truth began to form. This was no simple act of rebellion. It was a moment where authority had been challenged because it had crossed a line. The officials exchanged glances. They understood the seriousness of the situation. If handled poorly, it could cause unrest. If handled wisely, it could restore trust. The martial arts expert was returned to his room while the officials discussed privately. He sat again on the wooden bench, feeling the weight of uncertainty. He thought about his students, his quiet home, and the peaceful mornings he might never see again. Still, he did not regret his action. He believed that some moments in life demanded courage, even when the cost was high. Hours later, he was taken to another chamber. This one was larger and brighter. A senior official stood there, someone known for fairness rather than fear. The official spoke calmly, asking about the expert's training, his teacher, and his values. The martial artist answered honestly. He spoke of discipline, self-control, and responsibility. He said that strength without compassion was dangerous. The official listened carefully. He had seen many fighters in his life, but few who spoke with such humility. He asked why the expert did not run after striking the guard. The martial artist replied simply that running would have meant guilt. He believed facing the consequences was part of honor. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread throughout the city. People whispered about the man who dared to stand up. Some exaggerated the story, calling him fearless or reckless. Others spoke of him as a symbol of justice. The story grew larger than the man himself. The guard who had been struck was questioned again. His earlier anger began to fade as evidence mounted. His past behavior was reviewed, and complaints from previous events surfaced. The truth became harder to ignore. By nightfall, the officials reached a decision about the next steps. The martial arts expert would remain under watch while a full review took place. This alone was unusual. Many expected immediate punishment. Instead, there was caution, reflection, and restraint. As he was led back to his room, the expert noticed a change in the guards' behavior. They were quieter, more respectful. One even offered him water. He accepted it with a nod. Lying on the bench later, staring at the ceiling, he realized something important. One action, done with control and purpose, had started a chain of events far beyond his intentions. The real test was no longer about strength, but about truth, patience, and the courage to stand by one's values. The night passed slowly, and the city slept uneasily. Everyone sensed that this was no ordinary incident. Something meaningful was unfolding, and its outcome would be remembered long after the ceremony was forgotten. Morning light entered the room through a small, high window. The martial arts expert had not slept much. His body was calm, but his mind had stayed alert through the night. He rose slowly, stretched, and took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it with honesty. Soon, guards arrived and led him out. This time, they took him through longer hallways into a more formal section of the building. The walls were decorated with simple symbols of the kingdom's history. It reminded him that power was old, layered, and deeply rooted. One person standing against it could easily be crushed. He was brought before a larger group of officials. Some he had seen before, others were new. Their expressions were careful, serious, and unreadable. This was no longer just about one guard or one moment. It had become a matter of example. The questioning began again, but this time it was deeper. They asked about his past, his training, and his beliefs. They wanted to know if he had ever been involved in conflict before. He answered truthfully. He explained that he had avoided trouble his entire life, choosing peace over confrontation whenever possible. He told them that martial arts had taught him restraint above all else. They asked him why he had chosen to step in when others stayed silent. He paused before answering. Then he said something simple. He believed silence can sometimes cause more harm than action. He said that if everyone looks away, unfair behavior becomes normal. His words were not loud, but they carried weight. Some officials nodded quietly. Others remained unsure. Next, the officials called the guards involved in the incident. The guard who had been struck stood stiffly, his face tense. He repeated his claim that he had been doing his duty, but under careful questioning, his story began to weaken. He became defensive when asked about his tone and actions toward the civilian. His answers changed slightly each time. Other guards were questioned as well. One by one, they spoke about the atmosphere that day. Some admitted that stress and long hours had made tempers short. A few acknowledged that power sometimes made people forget their responsibility. These admissions were quiet but powerful. Outside the building, the city buzzed with rumors. The story had spread everywhere. People gathered in small groups, discussing what might happen. Some feared the martial arts expert would be punished severely to protect authority. Others hoped the truth would lead to fairness. For many, this moment felt like a test of justice. Inside, the officials requested written statements from witnesses. The young man who had been pushed wrote carefully, describing every detail. Other civilians added their voices. Each statement painted the same picture. The action of the martial arts expert did not appear reckless. It appeared measured. Still, the risk was real. Challenging a guard, even for the right reason, could not be taken lightly. The officials understood that their decision would send a message far beyond this room. Later that day, the martial arts expert was taken to a private chamber. A senior figure entered, someone whose presence demanded attention without words. He was not loud or threatening. His authority came from experience. The senior figure asked the expert one final question. If you could go back to that moment, would you act differently? The expert thought carefully. He said that he wished the situation had never happened. He wished the guard had shown restraint. He wished words alone had been enough. But if faced with the same moment again, with the same risk of harm, he would still choose to protect the vulnerable. He said he accepted any outcome that followed. The room fell silent. That answer changed the tone of everything. It showed responsibility, not defiance. It showed courage without pride. The senior figure left without comment. Hours passed. The martial arts expert waited again, this time in a different room. The wait felt longer than before. He reflected on how quickly life could shift. One quiet morning practice, one unexpected trip, and now his fate rested in the hands of others. As evening approached, news reached the building. Reports had come in about the guard's past conduct. There were patterns, nothing extreme but enough to show a habit of harshness. The officials now faced a difficult choice. Finally, the expert was escorted once more into the main hall. Everyone stood as a final decision was prepared. The atmosphere was tense but respectful. He stood straight, hands at his sides, eyes calm. He did not know whether freedom or punishment awaited him, but he knew he had not acted with hatred. The officials announced that the case was still under review, but immediate punishment would not be given. Instead, a full investigation into guard conduct would take place. The martial arts expert would remain under supervision but not confinement. This decision shocked many. It showed restraint, reflection, and a willingness to examine authority itself. As he was led away, the expert felt something shift inside him. Not relief, not victory, but understanding. His action had become part of something larger. The question was no longer about one strike. It was about the balance between power and responsibility. And that balance, once questioned, could never be ignored again. The days that followed felt slow and heavy. The martial arts expert was no longer locked in a small room, but he was still not free. He stayed in a guarded guest area inside the royal grounds. The space was simple, with a bed, a chair, and a small window that looked out onto a quiet courtyard. Guards were always nearby, yet their behavior had changed. They spoke politely and kept their distance. No one treated him like a criminal anymore, but no one treated him like a guest either. Each morning he woke early out of habit. He sat quietly, breathing deeply, keeping his body and mind steady. He did not train openly, but he stretched slowly and practiced calm movements in his thoughts. This routine helped him stay centered. He knew impatience would only weaken him. Outside, the investigation continued. Officials reviewed reports, witness accounts, and records. They spoke to citizens who had attended the ceremony. Many came forward, more than expected. Some were nervous, some afraid, but they spoke honestly. They talked about moments when guards had used authority too roughly in the past. They also spoke about how rare it was for anyone to step in. The martial arts expert became a quiet topic across the city. People did not know his name, but they spoke of his actions. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. Many simply wondered what kind of person would risk everything for a stranger. Small discussions turned into larger ones. People began to talk about respect, responsibility, and fairness. Inside the royal system, the mood shifted. Leaders realized this was no longer just a single incident. It had opened a door that had been closed for a long time. If they ignored it, trust could be damaged. If they handled it wisely, something good could grow. One afternoon, the expert was invited to speak again. This time, the meeting was smaller and more personal. Only a few officials were present. They asked about his life, not just the incident. They wanted to understand the person behind the action. He spoke about his childhood training. He explained how his teacher had focused on control, patience, and humility. He shared stories of lessons learned through silence rather than force. He said that real strength meant protecting others without seeking reward. His words were simple, but they carried depth. An official asked if he believed guards were bad people. He shook his head. He said most were likely doing their best under pressure, but he also said that power needed guidance or it could drift into harm without intention. He did not accuse, he explained. That honesty made a strong impression. Meanwhile, the guard who had been struck faced his own reality. He was removed from public duty during the investigation. At first, he was angry and defensive, but as days passed, and as he was questioned repeatedly, his tone changed. He began to reflect on his behavior. He remembered moments when frustration had guided his actions instead of responsibility. One evening, something unexpected happened. The guard requested to speak with the martial arts expert. The meeting was arranged carefully. Guards stayed nearby, but the two men were allowed to speak privately in a quiet room. The guard looked uncomfortable. He avoided eye contact at first. Then he spoke. He admitted that he had lost control that day. He said he had felt challenged and reacted poorly. He did not ask for forgiveness directly, but his voice showed regret. He said being struck had shocked him, not because of pain, but because it forced him to see himself from the outside. The martial arts expert listened calmly. He did not interrupt. When the guard finished, the expert spoke gently. He said the strike was never meant to humiliate. It was meant to stop harm. He said everyone makes mistakes, but growth begins when mistakes are faced honestly. The guard nodded. That conversation changed something for both of them. As the investigation neared its end, officials worked on new guidelines. Training programs were reviewed. Emphasis was placed on communication, restraint, and public respect. These changes were not announced loudly, but they were real. Finally, the day came for a final decision. The martial arts expert was called into the main hall one last time. The atmosphere was serious but calm. Officials stood, not above him but facing him. The lead official spoke clearly. He acknowledged that striking a guard was a serious matter, but he also acknowledged the expert's restraint, honesty, and purpose. He stated that the investigation had shown misuse of authority by the guard and that corrective actions were already underway. The decision was made. The martial arts expert would not face punishment. Instead, he was officially released. No public reward was given. No title was offered. His name would not appear in announcements, but his record would remain clean. The guard faced consequences suited to correction, not destruction. He was reassigned and required to complete further training. The hall was quiet when the decision ended. The expert bowed respectfully. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply accepted the outcome. When he stepped outside the royal grounds, the air felt lighter. The city looked the same, but he felt different. He had walked through fear, uncertainty, and judgment, and had come out without losing himself. As he prepared to leave the city, a few people recognized him. Some nodded. Some whispered thanks. He acknowledged them gently but did not stop. He did not want attention. He wanted peace. As he walked away, the city slowly returned to its rhythm, but something had changed beneath the surface. People remembered that quiet courage could shape powerful outcomes. And for the martial arts expert, the journey had confirmed what he had always believed. True strength does not shout. It stands firm, acts with care, and leaves a mark not through force, but through principle. The martial arts expert left the royal grounds quietly. He walked through the streets of the city, unnoticed by most. People still whispered about what had happened, but he did not mind. His thoughts were focused on returning to his simple life. Despite the chaos, the fear, and the uncertainty, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had acted according to his values and faced the consequences with honesty and respect. As he passed through the city, he noticed subtle changes. Guards walked more carefully. They spoke to citizens more politely. Small acts of kindness that had been rare before were now visible. People were more confident to speak, to ask questions, and to stand up calmly when necessary. Though he had not sought recognition, his actions had created a ripple effect far beyond what he had imagined. He reached a small inn on the outskirts of the city, where he decided to rest for the night before continuing home. The inn was quiet, with soft candlelight and the gentle sounds of evening. He sat by the window, looking out at the moon reflecting on the streets below. He thought about the young man he had protected and the royal guard who had changed because of that single moment. Life, he realized, was not about power or control, but about courage, responsibility, and the choices one made in the moment of need. That night, he reflected on the events with a sense of gratitude. He was grateful for his training, which had given him the skills and discipline to act correctly. He was grateful for his teacher, whose lessons on patience and humility had guided his every decision. And he was grateful for the young man, who had shown him that even ordinary people could inspire extraordinary responsibility in others. The next morning, he left the city entirely. He did not look back. His journey home was long and quiet, giving him time to think. Along the way, he met travelers, merchants, and villagers, all of whom had heard the story of the martial arts expert who had struck a royal guard. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some inspired. Yet he spoke little of what had happened. He knew that true action needed no explanation or applause. When he returned to his small town, life seemed peaceful again. He resumed his training, teaching, and quiet routines, but something inside him had shifted. He had faced the world at its most intense, where authority and judgment could have crushed him. Yet he had remained true to his values, showing that courage and restraint could coexist. His students noticed a change as well. The way he moved, spoke, and carried himself seemed even calmer and more confident. They listened to his lessons with new understanding. His story, though untold to them in detail, became a living example of strength, honor, and responsibility. Over time, the events in the city became part of quiet conversations among citizens. The royal guard learned from his mistake and became a more careful, respectful figure. Officials continued to implement small changes, ensuring that authority was exercised responsibly. The martial arts expert had left no mark on the surface, Yet his influence persisted in ways he would never witness directly. He understood then what true impact meant. It was not fame, recognition, or reward. It was the subtle shift in people's actions, the growth of fairness, and the courage to act rightly even when facing uncertainty. He had not fought for glory. He had acted for principle. And that principle, more powerful than any title or sword, had changed the course of a moment, and perhaps the future, forever. Years later, when people spoke quietly about courage, integrity, or standing up for others, some would remember the martial arts expert. They might never know his name. They might never see him again. But they would remember the lesson. That strength is measured not by how loudly one can strike, but by how wisely, calmly, and honorably one chooses to act. The martial arts expert continued his life quietly, teaching, practicing, and living with purpose. He never sought attention. Yet in every small act of fairness, protection, and restraint, his story lived on. He had proven that one individual, guided by discipline and courage, could make an enormous difference, not through power or pride, but through the quiet, determined actions of the heart. And so the world moved on, unaware of many things, but those who had witnessed, directly or indirectly, remembered the silent lesson. True strength comes not from force, but from honor, restraint, and the courage to do what is right, no matter the risk. The martial arts expert walked on, calm and composed, a living example of courage and principle, leaving behind a ripple of change that would quietly inspire generations to come.